Do this right. All good. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to CEPES, Continuing Professional Education Services Hot Topic. I always say we do it monthly, but this month we're doing it this week and next week. Same time, 8 o'clock in the morning. If anybody's interested in joining us, register for a conversation on PCBs and how the EPA rules are being intertwined and adopted here in New Jersey. And Dr. George Berkowitz and Roger Ferguson will opine on that. And that'll, whenever you get, George and Roger in the same room, whether it's virtually or in person, it always ends up to be very entertaining. So I would highly recommend everybody sign up for that. But this morning we have, Tony Russo, who is the president of CIANJ, as well as the publisher of Commerce Magazine, and jack of all trades. And what I always like to say is, Tony's background puts him in an interesting perspective when he deals with legislators. He has a degree in engineering from NJIT. He spent time at DEP. He spent time in the consulting world. He spent time, oh my God, I just forgot, Petroleum Institute?
Chemistry Council.
Chemistry Council. Then for some reason he took off some time and fled to DC. Never quite understood those years in DC for the lime industry lobbying. Is that what it was?
Yeah, not the fruit, but the calcium.
Yeah, that's right. And then back here to New Jersey with CIANJ, and we were talking about the other day. How many years as president now?
Oh, 8 as president, 12 years here. So I'll be celebrating 13 years in March of next year.
Yeah. And I like to bring Tony in. We do this as a hot topic to talk about what's going on in New Jersey. And I think it's important right now, especially we have, less than 30 days. I think we're at 27 days until the election day on November 4th. I call it election week now because you got early voting starts October 25th to November 2nd. And then November 4th. And but there's other things going on. So we're going to hit. So I'm going to actually, Tony, I'm going to pin you a little, give you the opportunity if people see you up front, close and personal. And give us a little blurb first as to, where do you see we are, what's going on, and what do we need to watch out for? Then we have some of our topics that we'll hit.
Yeah, no, thank you, Phil. And good morning, everybody. And we're lucky to have Phil on our board. So Phil mentioned the CIANJ, and we're very fortunate to have Phil. I guess, Phil, it's been about a year now that you've joined the board, and I want to thank George and Jules, too. You guys have been great to work with, CPES. You guys do a great job. It's also, I want to acknowledge my colleague and friend, Mike Eggington from the State Chamber, who's going to keep me on track today if I say anything that isn't quite accurate. I'm sure he'll opine on what his thoughts are and everything. But to your point, Phil, us political junkies, and it's interesting because I had the technical background, the engineering background, but working in Trenton and representing the businesses, you become a political junkie and you realize just how important politics plays a role in business. And I'll give you the example, right? Everybody knows that legislation starts in the state house, and then you have regulation when the governor and the legislature pass or enact laws. But the third leg to that stool, which is, I think, and I've been on a mission, telling our members is, and this is something that you can't easily define ahead of time, and that's policy, right? And we'll give you an example, right? Governor Murphy is now phasing out, come January 20th. When you think about his energy policy, right, his master plan, what kind of impact that's had on the business climate the last 8 years, his efforts to bring wind in, and obviously that didn't go too well. But, when you look at the two candidates right now, right, whether it's Congresswoman Cheryl, Jack Ciattarelli, you have two people that when it comes to policy is really going to make a difference between, and again, what your views are, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, they can't be more contrary to what, each other's views are. I mean, we're going in two different directions in terms of just energy, environmental policy, which a lot of the folks on the call care about. So policy matters, and that's what I was going to say. So the elections, in I guess November 4th, like you said, Phil, early voting starts October 25th. The vote by mail has already begun. I've read somewhere that I think the turnout or the ballots received is about 2%. So, it's starting to climb. But I guess we could talk about the elections because I want to
Yep.
share some numbers with people, but we can get into some other things first.
Yeah,
But thank you for having me.
we'll get to that at the end. And by the way, just a reminder, I think it's October 12th is the last, or October 14th is the last day to register to vote. And, being in the middle of something in my local town right now in Toms River, it boggles my mind how many people are not registered to vote. And by the way, I will tell you, I meet with a lot of married couples and couples that are together. The women are registered, the men are not. I haven't figured that out yet. So men, get out there and register to vote. So I'm not sorry. So we're going to break down, start kind of close, and then work our way up to the gubernatorial race. So I want to talk regulations first. Okay, because we're sitting here, we said we got 27 days to election day. We got about, what do we got? About 85 days till Christmas and then the end of the year. And then, so anything that's out there right now, regulation wise, what are you hearing? What do you think is going to happen? So I listed a few of them. The ARCS package. That's the administrative requirements for the remediation of contaminated sites, DEP. Proposal went out there. There was some really questionable topics, some things that were controversial relative to reporting. Where do you hear and what are you hearing as far as what department is looking to do right now?
Yeah, a good question, right? And obviously there's going to be a change in administration. From what I know and from who I talk to, I think nothing will happen before the elections, right? Because again, we're only about a month out now. And so, I could be wrong, but I don't think anything drastic is going to come out of DEP in terms of finalizing anything. One of the ones that I was going to talk about was the site remediation rules, right? The disclosure issue that was front and center that we've talked about all year, right? I guess the comment period closed back in January. Here we are already, second week in October. Still don't know if they're going to finalize it. I'm speculating now, but I think they're going to want to wait until what happens with the elections, and then that'll make a decision on what they do, right? And I'll give you the two scenarios. Again, it's all speculation, but pretty plausible, and I've talked to other people that agree. If Jack wins, then, you're probably going to see a very busy lame duck period, right? And that lame duck starts right after the elections through January 20th of next year. That's the legislative side of it, which we could talk about. But, and again, the administration could choose to finalize everything now anyway. They're just working through the issues and clearing it with council. But I also think that, a lot's going to depend on who wins. If it's Mikey Sherrill, then and maybe they punt and defer over to her. My opinion, I'm sure Mike would agree, when you have a change in administration like this, probably the best thing to do is defer a lot of these things into the next governor. Like we're talking about DEP rules, Phil, but I can tell you the Department of Labor with independent contractors issues, pay notification. There's a lot of rules out there that could be impactful to businesses that we've all opined on and submitted comments on that we hope they don't finalize. But we're going to just wait and see. But I think a lot depends on who wins November 4th.
Yeah, I saw it again. I read a lot of different blogs that come out every day, but I saw something the other day that threw something out where there's over 100 proposed rules right now that have not been adopted in all of the different departments, and that basically what happens, what doesn't happen. And I agree with you. I think it depends on, you don't want to shake up the election by something going through quickly or someone pushing anything through and it becoming controversial. So you might be quiet until November 4th, and then November 5th, things may start flying depending upon who wins, and I think the disclosure, does everybody have to report when there's knowledge of a discharge in New Jersey? And, the chilling effect that could have on real estate and, economic development as to what could happen if that has to start happening when people do due diligence on buying and selling properties.
So, so I guess, Phil, and I think everybody on this call probably can appreciate this. If regulations are adopted, right, if they're finalized, they're harder to unravel because of the Administrative Procedures Act, right, as opposed to legislation. Because legislation gets adopted. Guess what? The new governor, the new legislature can come back and issue an amendment. They can issue a new law. But, you get stuck in the mud when it comes to these regulations, and that's my concern, is that if Governor Murphy's administration, they finalize a lot of those rules you talked about, and we need to change them, we're talking years,
Right.
to actually get them unraveled, which
And
is
if
not
I
going to be good.
And if I understand the process correctly, I mean, one is you would have to have the new commissioners agree to do
Yes,
something with those rules, or you would need an act of legislature to
right.
direct something to have the rules. I mean, we could be retired by the time that ends up happening. Well,
Yeah, it's not
yeah,
going to be good, right? And a lot of these rules will go into effect, and people have to start complying. That's going to create enforcement, confusion. People spending money, hiring consultants and attorneys. And again, it could be a good thing, right? Depending on where you're coming from. But again, I think the right thing to do is to defer to the incoming governor.
So speaking about confusion, A901, Um, you know, we've heard a lot about that. It's kind of been quiet lately, where we thought we were going to have some kind of action from Senator Smith. We thought we'd have something from the commissioner's office. The 80901 rules, again, have not been adopted. They're sitting there right now. Where are we with the changes to
Well,
that?
breaking news for everybody today, but
Yep.
I did hear back from Senator Smith's folks, Celia and a woman named Sadie, and they did send us a draft bill, right? So if you can imagine, the coalition is the Utilities Association,
Mhm.
builders, us, the state chamber. It wasn't everything that we wanted. So before I sent it out to the entire coalition, we're working on some tweaks. I could share what they are. I mean, the utilities, seem to be carved out appropriately, right? This is where they do some yard work or they do some work on highways and they generate the dirt, the haz waste, the solid waste. And it seems like this fix is going to make them happy. Then also our landscape members, I'm happy to say that there is language in this draft bill that would raise the thresholds from 15, on a truck to 200 on a truck, and then 100 at the
Wow.
yard to 200. Anybody over that would have to either get the certification or apply for the A901. The thing that really was the issue, and we're working through it, is the term broker, right? That everybody's familiar with, is what is a broker? Who is a broker, right? We're still stuck there, right? And we got to work with Senator Smith. Again, the intent, not to get too deep into the weeds, but if you could go back to Sandy, go back to what happened, 2012, the reports that were generated, they're saying that there are a lot of brokers, and in my mind, these are true brokers that, you know, take the material and then figure out where to dispose of it, right? Whether or not they hire licensed brokers, I mean, that's not brokers, but haulers. That seemed to be the issue. So there's a broad definition in the statute. There was a broad definition in the proposed regulations that haven't been finalized yet. LSRPs are carved out, but everybody else would be brought in. And right. And what we're seeing, Phil, and I'm sure people on the call could share their experiences, but I've been getting emails and phone calls from either people bidding on work or they're going out and there's mixed debris and people are the DEP is basically saying, you need an A901, you're a broker. You're handling materials at an abandoned property, you're scheduling waste pickups, you're a broker, right? You need to get that A901. So it's problematic because what the hope is, once we fix this bill, I'll send it out to the coalition. I got to do it in a way where, and Mike knows this, where the senator has to introduce it. And I'm hoping that he either introduces it at the end of October or I guess right after the elections. And then we start working on it in lame duck. All right. But then we got to get the DP on board with it. But this is one that'll converge where, again, depending on who wins the election, I'm hoping that our draft bill gets out there. We start working on it. We get the DP's support. They don't finalize the rule because, again, it's problematic. The other thing I want to mention, and a lot of you on this call probably get impacted, but should that rule be finalized, right? So let's just play devil's advocate here.
Right. Definitely. Yeah.
And let's just say by the end of the year, calendar year, they adopt it before they leave office. Right now, the rule in the statute says you have 30 days to submit your A901 application, which is crazy. If you're familiar with A901, you're gathering paperwork, bank records, notices of violations, not only on your company, on your cousin, your
Yeah.
spouse, your kids, that 30 days. So we're actually asking that in the statute that we get some flexibility should anybody be subject to the A901, you at least have 90 days to get an application in. But more importantly, too, because it takes 2 years to get an A901, and this is going to be key, is that you're allowed to operate during the time that your application is in.
Right. And isn't there also, I remember when it was a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, time flies. You had to submit a application to say that you have the interest to get the A901 for this.
It's a
So
registration, yeah.
registration. So I mean, the universe of people who can now apply is small, isn't it? I mean, if you didn't submit then, is it gonna reopen again if they adopt the rules?
Yeah, no, I think, and that's a good point, because anybody that's involved and has solid and dirty dirt, right, contaminated dirt,
Right.
needed to register a
Right.
couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are entities out there that never registered, they could be subject to enforcement. But I think it was a couple of thousand, Phil, that
Was
actually registered, if not more.
yeah.
So the universe is out there. My concern is really it's not the intent, and I think Senator Smith agrees that, he didn't really want to cast this broad net to capture all these other folks. Like, to me, a true broker, if you're a licensed professional, you're exempt. But let's just say you don't have the LSRP, and yet you're going to call one of the waste companies to come pick up a pile of dirt at your cleanup site. You shouldn't have to get an A901, right? You should hire the A901 truck to come get the dirt and sample it and do all the right things. But I think the senator understood that it's just superfluous for that person to get their A901. And it really wouldn't be more protective of the environment. Again, A901, the concept there is to purge any criminal activity, anybody that, is not trustworthy on how this dirt is handled. So I think this is by far probably one of the big issues I know I'm working with. But the good news, like I said, that we should have draft legislation introduced before or after the elections.
Right. And Keith points out the LSRP exemption is strictly for an LSRP who is retained to provide site remediation on a specific site. It's not a blanket exemption across the board. So, you know, last one I have on my list there is the real regulations. And I know it's regulations twice in there. This was the one where the department kind of pulled back. They changed the elevation and have increased it. It was a short window for a second proposal. I think it was maybe 45, 60 days over the summer, and that's back out. This is, I always say, having unfortunately read it, because it's big, it's intense, but I live in a shore community. This doesn't affect just shore communities. This is like widespread to waterfront properties. And this was really a big one for the Murphy administration. Do you think this is one that they try to push out no matter what?
Yeah, I mean, and then I want to kind of acknowledge that Ray Cantor from BIA led a coalition on this. So he's definitely closer to this than I was. But I agree with you, Phil, because this has to do with flooding right across the state.
Yep.
And the big attempt right now, if you balance all the flooding that's happened, and we've seen it with all the affordable housing and the density, where do people build, right? And then everything becomes now, runoff, stormwater management, that's a big issue. So yeah, I could see this real rule being one of them that gets finalized before the new administration. And again, those conversations are probably happening right now. I don't know, with the Jack campaign and the Mikey campaign, probably not, probably too early. But those are the conversations that would happen right after the election results. Is what do we keep? What do we finalize? What do we want to do? That'll be interesting times, right? And I mean, hopefully we have a seat at the table there to kind of weigh in on it.
Yeah, and I don't want to put you on the spot because it's not on our list, but you brought it up. And I don't know if you're prepared to talk upon it, but you did say affordable housing. And I think the interesting part about how real plays into affordable housing is, it kind of reduces areas where you can do affordable housing. Okay, depending upon the municipality. But I guess a week or 2 weeks ago, the judge dismissed that case up in Bergen County. I don't know if you followed that at all, which basically threw, I think, 26 municipalities that were, fighting the number that they had to do in their municipalities, and the judge dismissed it, and basically dismissed it because legislative intent was to move forward.
You feel it's a hot item.
Yeah.
And I was at an event yesterday where a bunch of mayors we're talking where they may just take their chance and do what's called the builder's remedy, right? Like, let's just avoid this requirement to build all these affordable houses. Because the problem is, and you talk to a lot of these townships, they just don't have the space,
Right.
right? They don't have the space to put these units on. And if they're compelled to do it and they're doing it in a floodplain, that's the contradiction with the real rules, right? And to me, that's why I see the problem. And it's not an easy one to overcome. And I think it's going to require more legislative fixes, even under the new governor. So, but yeah, no, I've been following it kind of on the outside because it is a hot political item right now, affordability in general, right? But that's like a double-edged sword, right? Because everybody's enjoying their property values going up. What happens now if, look, I think we all agree, if you drive around, the rental markets are through the roof, right?
Crazy.
Multifamily. And then it's storage areas, right? Storage units, right? I mean, the developers are smart. They're going where the market drivers are, and the market is telling them that people want to rent as opposed to owning. But you still have these affordable housing obligations that you're supposed to do, even for rentals, and that's where I think it's going to be town by town, where it'll be interesting to see, if they decide to sue, if they decide to go with the builder's remedy. And again, I don't know how that all works. I'm sure millions of dollars are spent each year in court cases, fighting this, but it's such a hot topic that I'm sure we'll see more activity on it.
Yeah, and I know, Tom's River is tied up in a lawsuit right now that's going to be an interesting one that plays into other municipalities and builders and everything like that. But that's a municipality, and I can't think of the number that there are, where builders had approvals to do affordable housing, and the municipalities are now saying, yeah, you know what, we've already met our criteria, we're not going to do any more. So that's going to be the next I think that's in front of the judge October 20th to see where that plays out. And if the judge dismisses the first one on legislative intent, I don't know how he doesn't do the second one on legislative intent too. But
I
you know,
don't know.
that's a judicial system, which, by the way, we talk about the three prongs of government. I think this year we've seen a lot of activity out of our courts. And not to, I'll jump forward a little bit, then we'll come back. But that came up last night in the debate. We'll get into the debate at the end. But the fact that there will be 2 seats over the next 4 years that'll probably be replaced. I know in the presidential elections over the past 8 years, it's been a big part of it. Does it play as much of a part when it comes into gubernatorial elections that people think about those things?
It's a good question, Phil. I don't know. I think so. I think it's important on the appointments and how those appointments are made to the state Supreme Court.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, does it matter? Yes. I'm not going to discount it. Is it at the top of the list? Probably not. But I think people want to be weary. And again, and I was just somewhere where I think some appointments were held up because, again, if you know how it works in New Jersey, you have to get Senate confirmation for some of these appointments. And, a lot of times they'll, horse trade right back and forth, like, okay, I'll support so-and-so if you give me something else. And so a lot of it's stuck. They're stuck. But yeah, I think it's something that it's interesting to see. But that goes back to what I was telling you, the power of the governor who's coming in, whether it's Mikey or Jack, the power of policy, the power of appointments, and what that means when you trickle down to impact on regulations, impact on court cases. This matters to business. I mean, it's woven into our fabric. There is not any business, right? And Mike would agree with me. And I tell our members this every day. If you are, I guess the saying is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? So you will be impacted by all levels of government, no matter what your business is. So it's to your advantage to know who your elected officials are, build relationships with them, share your views and positions because it matters. And so I think right now with this upcoming election, like the things I was saying about policy, appointments, that matters because people understand legislation, they understand regulation, but when then we're like, well, why does it matter? And you could go back through our governors the last 15, 20 years, and Mike knows this, each governor has a legacy, right? Whether it was mental health with Governor Cody, right? Jim McGreevey was all about getting rid of the tolls. John Corzine wanted to monetize the turnpike. Chris Christie definitely turned Trenton upside down and the way he kind of reorganized a lot of things. And so it matters. Think about from your own perspectives, why, this kind of thing matters. So here we are, we're at a point in time where, and we'll talk about the elections and turnout, but it matters. So.
Yeah. And again, people forget, we may be one of the smallest states in the country, but we have the most powerful governor in the country. The authorities that they have and the abilities, I mean, it was no more evident during COVID, but it is very powerful. And you talked about appointments. And I was having a conversation the other day because New Jersey's commissions and boards are well under appointed, we'll say. There's a lot of seats open on a lot across the board. And the person basically said to me, well, it really depends on the policies and the decisions of the governor as to who he wants to, put in those positions.
So,
And if he doesn't like something in his policy, he won't fill the commission.
right. And so I just heard this yesterday, but I guess the legislative calendar came out for lame duck, and Senate President Scutari and Speaker Coughlin, I guess, now situated it too. So New Jersey's governor has two powerful vetoes that a lot of other states don't have, and that's the pocket veto and the line item veto, right? What's the pocket veto? Pocket veto is, let's just say the term ends January 20th, is the third Tuesday where the new governor takes office. If bills are on the desk of the governor and he doesn't take action on it, he puts them in his pocket, they go away. But the technicality is you could set the legislative calendar such that he won't have that ability to pocket veto any bills, which is interesting because then if the legislative calendar, which is out now, doesn't allow, because you have a certain amount of days to act on legislation as a governor, right? Or you send it back. You either veto it, conditional veto, or you ask for amendments, that kind of thing. But it's interesting. Again, lame duck is so important that it's like it's super speed. It's legislation on super speed, and a lot of times it's happening during the holidays, the New Year, and people aren't paying attention.
Yep.
But
Come back for Civics 101 next month, and we'll go forward on that conversation. But so legislative wise, let's talk about it. Do we think we're going to see any narrowing of the Democratic control in the Assembly? And with that also, do we think we're going to see any, pro-business or pro-environment legislators lose their seats because of their positions? And what should we be thinking or be concerned about, or make sure we get to the polls to vote on?
So right now in the Assembly, there are 80 seats. The Democrats control it by 52 seats to the Republicans 28. Right. You need 41 for a majority, right? So think about it. They have literally 11, a plurality of 11 that they, have the majority. Do I see a couple of seats flipping here? It's possible. I mean, down in Burlington County, I think it's District 8. Brendan Umba was the Republican incumbent 2 years ago. He lost by, I think, less than 1,000 votes. So do I see the Republicans picking up a couple of seats? Yeah, probably. But is it going to be enough to overcome the majority? Probably not. But anything can happen in politics, right? So that's, I have to qualify it there, right? It all depends on, all politics are local, as Tip O'Neill said. And that's where you got to be, no matter what poll you read, Phil, no matter what you see, at the end of the day, you just don't know in every district who's going to come out, why, who wins. And that's the exciting thing about politics and elections, is the surprise, the unexpected surprise.
Yeah. Remind me I'll tell you my Tip O'Neill story another day. But I think, and I can't remember the gentleman who's the assemblyman out of Morris County who spoke at one of our meetings, Bergen, yeah. And he talked about the benefit of that margin shrinking, because when you have a closer margin, you basically can get more done. When you have somebody, overwhelmed, he's like, so that's one of the most important aspects, is we get a closer margin with the opportunity of negotiations and to be able to get more done than just beating each other over the head.
Good point. Right. Yeah. But I mean, look, to be honest with you, I think most of New Jerseyans don't even realize that there's an election, and we could talk about it. When the president is not on the ballot, the voter turnout drops tremendously.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm in Ocean County, 23% of the people voted in the primary
Yeah.
in the entire
Well,
Ocean
I'll
County.
give you the numbers, Phil. I'll give you the numbers, right? Because again, I in preparing for today, I went back over the last few governor elections, right? So just to go back to 2020, very contentious, right? You had George Floyd, you had COVID, you had the whole, Trump versus Biden. The turnout in New Jersey was through the roof. It was like in the 80s,
Yep.
right? That's extraordinary. I mean, that's like never happened before. The last November, that turnout dropped to 64%. Right? Why? Right? It was just as contentious when you think about Trump versus Kamala, but that dropped to 64%. When I looked at the governor's races without the president on a ballot, it literally is between 40 to 45%. So now you could do the math. If you have 6.5 million registered voters, 2.5 are registered Democrats, 2.5 million. The Republican numbers are climbing at 1.6 million, and then the rest are unaffiliated, right? So you could do the math. That's about almost 3 million people are probably going to decide. So half of the vote, who our new governor is, and you could do half of that. If you can get to 1.4, 1.5 million, you're the new governor. How does Jack get there? We could talk about that. How does Mikey get there? We could talk about that. It's not just because people say it's about turnout, but it's about turnout where, right? Because that's where you got to really do the deep dive is, for their path. It's a numbers game, right? Forget about the politics. It's pure numbers game. And at the end of the day, you get to 1.4, 1.5. I mean, could I be wrong? Maybe it approaches 50%, right? But we talked about this last time. It's no longer an election day. It's an election season with the vote by mail, early voting, right? So it'll be interesting to see if that motivates more people to come out. But when you go back to the presidential election, it didn't. It went from 85%, 4 years earlier to 64%. That means more people stayed home. It could be a lot of reasons too.
Right. No, it's interesting. We're going to hold that for to the end. Okay. I got one more thing I want to hit upon before we get to that. And that is, so let's talk the federal government. Okay. Right now we're in the middle of a shutdown. I think it's funny. I think yesterday was the first day because of what happened in the Middle East that we really didn't hear much about the fact of the shutdown, but there was a vote. It got shut down again, and it doesn't appear they're any closer to ending this shutdown. What are you hearing from your businesses? What are you hearing in New Jersey about effects from this shutdown? And now, and then, where do we think this goes in the next week, if not longer, if this continues forward?
Yeah, it is a problem,
Yeah.
right? I'll share anecdotally why it's a problem. And the longer it goes, the more you're going to feel the impacts. First couple of days, nobody would know, right? It's now the money stops and now you can't get things done. That's a problem. So for example, one of our manufacturers imports aluminum. They got hit with the aluminum tariff for like 55%. We engaged, his congressional rep. Congressional reps like, yeah, let me work on exemptions, right, with the White House. That all stops because everybody's off, right? So that all stops. They have to keep shipping it. They can't pass on those costs to their clients because they have signed contracts. But that's an example where, it really hits home, right? Colleges, think about the colleges, whether it's grants, money that's coming in. If that stops, EPA, right, getting permits, Department of Commerce, getting grants to travel. I think the longer it goes on, Phil, the more damage it is to the economy. And I think if you go back, as somebody was asking me, has this ever happened before? I could be wrong, but I think I think it was under President Trump's first term where they were shut down for at least 3 weeks, right? So that's maybe the test right now. Is it going to be longer than 3 weeks? And what's that impact on this governor's race too? We're going to start to feel that too.
I can't remember what year it was, but I actually went to see Rutgers football play SMU in Texas, and there was a government shutdown because we went to go to the Bush Museum, and it was closed because of the shutdown. So whatever year that was, and that went like 3 weeks, I think is what it was. I have to go back and look at my days. But you said EPA, DEP. I'll say DEP. A lot of the funding that comes into DEP comes from EPA. So I mean, how does that affect workforce if that funding starts getting held? We're seeing already who's not getting paid as that trickles down. Now we know that Congress is getting paid, and that I think everybody keeps making a face about that. But when that money doesn't come in locally to your states, what happens to your state government?
I think you're going to have to shuffle. I mean, and so here's the issue that you got to bring up, Phil, is if the federal monies have been deposited in the accounts here in New Jersey,
Right,
then
you're good.
everything keeps going,
Yep.
right? It's when those dollars dry up and then there's nobody else in Washington or in district offices to send you the money. That's where it stops. And I think you're going to see that in academia. You're going to start seeing that in construction, infrastructure projects. You're going to start seeing that again, just like the examples I said, little things, right? People have to do business, and maybe they need exemptions from the tariffs. Maybe they need a permit from EPA, and that goes away.
Yeah. Keith puts in there 2018-19 was 35 days. So
Yeah,
that sounds about right based upon the Rutgers football schedule. Um, that's how I go by things. You had the administrator from the EPA back in, I think that
May.
was in May, and talked about how he had just started meeting with Commissioner LaTourette. They agreed upon some things, didn't agree upon some things, and basically that was really going to be the relationship and how things would go. I mean, I don't really, in what I do in site remediation, I haven't seen really an effect from the you know EPA or the Trump administration on projects. Have you heard or seen any of that from your members or from people in New Jersey that you're talking to, as well as possibly DOT or Department of Justice? I mean, have you seen anything?
No, but he said something back in May which really stuck out with me. And when he said, "Look, we're going to be committed to funding the environmental to protect the environment, whether it's water, waste, air." I think the thing that distinguishes the Trump administration from the previous is like anything that really can't be traced back to actual protection, they're going to claw back, right? So whether it's environmental justice, and I mean that in the sense of whether it's training grants or educational grants, community grants, those type of things could be impacted. Those kind of funds, but I haven't really seen or heard that there's anything that's been clawed back that impacts ongoing projects here. But I think the thing to really start again, if EPA is now not working, right, those funds aren't going right today and tomorrow. NJIT is putting on a PFAS summit, right? So what goes on with PFAS, right? To me, that's such an emergent issue that nobody could figure it out. Like, do
Right.
we ban? Do we not ban? Do we pass legislation? Do we defer to EPA? You know, Nobody knows, Phil. But I think government has to get back to being open in order for this. But going back to your original question about, any EPA monies being dried up, I haven't heard anything yet.
Right. And you talked about PFAS. I mean, that's, New Jersey's been in the forefront of the PFAS, the emerging contaminants, relative to standards, relative to remediation requirements. And, he did mention in that meeting that day that they were going to be looking at, what the federal response has been, the federal standards, and how states are looking at that. I haven't heard anything that EPA has changed or pushed anything into DEP, which doesn't surprise me. But at the same time, though, you look at where New Jersey has taken the approach of the PFAS standard, and but you haven't heard anything different from industry. And right now, again, EPA is kind of shut down, so nothing's really going on.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, like I said, yeah, it's so complicated though when you're thinking about PFAS because I know the state legislature had some bills that they wanted to push through and they kind of stalled. But
Yep.
here's what I could tell you, and some manufacturers told me this, right? PFAS, like 13,000 chemicals. A lot of it you can't replace, and a lot of these are military equipment, and so what do you do? It's not like you can just ban PFAS without a plan, right?
Right.
So if you want to ban it, then what's going to be the substitute? And that's where you have to go back and forth deliberate. It's so complicated that I just think you need to keep talking about it, really, and with all the stakeholders.
Right. And I think it is something that needs to continue, as the science evolves, we need to
Yeah.
really continue to start talking about it, keep the conversation going, because things should change with it. I think that's been, something I think a lot of us have been frustrated about is as we see new science, the department has not been as flexible. They've kind of gone forward with guidance and rules without science leading the way sometimes. So, why don't we jump in? So we got 20 minutes left. Okay. First thing I want to ask you on the governor's race. And you can talk about all your numbers you have in front of you. But at the end of the day, as we sit here in a federal government shutdown, as we hear everything coming out of the federal government, as we saw, Chitterelli endorsed by Trump, and maybe that helped him get to the finish line in the primary. What does that effect have in 27 days left? And again, in 27 days, we're not quite sure what President Trump will do. Um, where do you think that plays into the end result here in New Jersey, for who our next governor is?
You mean the Trump effect?
The Trump effect. We'll start with the Trump
Yeah.
effect.
So it's a good question. So, and everybody's got their own opinion. I'm of the ilk that New Jersey is not a Trump state, right? It's a purple state. It's a blue state. So if you add up the 6.5 million registered voters and you add up the unaffiliated, the majority of them lean Democrat, right? I mean, the Democrats have better numbers. I don't think the Trump effect is as big as probably the Cheryl campaign wants it to be. Again, you're not seeing a lot of news. The two things that hurt him right now is shut down the tariffs, right? Because they are taxes. I mean, whether or not, again, you agree with it or not, I mean, they are an added cost to consumer goods, and our members are feeling it. So, but I don't think you're seeing it, Phil. I mean, I think both Mikey and Jack with the two debates, I mean, everything is happening at super speed that here we are October 10th, right? And the elections are about a month away, 3 weeks away. And I don't think it's that, the Trump event. Now that could change if there's a story, happens in the next 3 weeks. That's the beautiful thing about politics, right? One news story could send us in a different direction. And that's what sometimes it takes. But I haven't seen that Trump effect yet.
Right. And in the interesting world we live in now, and I can't remember the number you threw out there, X number of people have already voted. It's done, over with. Whatever happens in the next 27 days, they've already voted. They can't pull it back. I talk to people all the time who say, oh, they love the early voting now. And by the way, what's the number one reason? Well, I get off for election day. So this way, if I vote early on the weekend, I can take the day and actually have a vacation day. I'm like, well, that wasn't the intent of the day off election day. But anyway, really, talk about 27 days, today being the 9th, really you're 16 days away from early voting.
Yeah,
So,
I'm of the ilk that most New Jerseyans know who they're going to vote for at this point. I read somewhere that maybe 10% of the voters are still undecided. Well, I don't know who these 10 people are. If you think about it, all right. I mean, I think people know who they're going to vote. So let the casting begin and, tally up. It's really, like I said, it's not only about turnout, but where the turnout comes from. That's going to be key. But to this group, I did look again, when you look at Jack's environmental agenda versus Mikey's environmental agenda, not a lot of specifics on either side, right? It's kind of like we haven't really talked about energy a lot, Phil, and that's something
right.
that, is number one with a lot of our members. You see it at the debate, you see it in the news. And I'll give you another anecdotally. One of our manufacturers told me she got her June electrical bill was $13,000 to run a manufacturing plant. In July, that same bill went to $23,000. So do the math; it's almost double,
Yeah.
right? She didn't budget for it. It happened. Everybody's is running around. Mike and I were at the hearing in August on energy. People are trying to scratch this. Well, how do we fix this? How do we fix this? Right. So to me, again, going back to their environmental agendas, Mikey's saying I'm going to freeze rates. Jack is saying we're going to pull out of the regional greenhouse gas initiative. We're going to do a bunch of things, but realize that takes time, all of that. And so are we going to see rates going back? To me, the bigger problem is this Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, the PJM grid, right? Which started out as 3 states, Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland, is now 13, right? Including DC. And interesting enough, if you go to their website, they have a pie chart of, obviously, we all know that demand's going through the roof because of AI, data centers, right? Supply has been impacted because we shut down coal, shut down natural gas plants. We went all in on wind. We went all in on solar. Look at their pie chart. They're saying right now 45% of what goes into the grid is natural gas. 45%. That's half. So are we going to start opening up those plants again? Yeah, probably. That's going to take years. I do think that the small modular nuclear reactor thing, the SMRs, will probably gain some traction, right? If we could do it on submarines, why not do it, locally where it can help offset some of the supply needs. So energy to me is going to be lame duck, probably early next year, whoever the new governor is. Energy, energy, energy. And that ties into climate change. That ties into all the things that we talked about. I don't know if people know, but if you go to the DEP's website last month, they issued a report on the economic impacts of climate change, which is kind of interesting. So, I started reading through it, and it's interesting. But those two converge: energy, climate change, and what we do. Do we put more, efforts and resources into nukes, solar, wind? I don't think wind is going to be coming back, but it's going to be a big issue. It's going to be a big.
Wind will be a tough battle to bring back after everything that's happened, even though even the Trump administration has kind of approved some of the New York and Northern Monmouth permits that were originally pulled back on. I don't think we're going to see that back. And the thing with the small nuclear modules is we have the infrastructure in place at a lot of facilities that you basically can bring them back quicker than other energy options.
Yeah, but so the hearing that we went to in August, the issue is always about money, right? State incentives, subsidies. We also haven't talked about the fiscal cliff that I think is coming next year for whoever the governor is. We've been riding pretty good, right? Mike and I have been doing this a long time. Usually the debate in Trenton is which taxes you raise and geez, how are we going to plug this deficit? Last 5 years, we've had surpluses.
Yeah,
never heard of.
Yeah, but how much of that was tied to COVID?
A lot. It was not only tied to the COVID, right? It was the Infrastructure Act. It was the American Rescue Plan Act. So, yeah, monies were coming in and the projected surpluses. But now you're starting to see that, look, the corporate business tax was a negative number in August, right? Right from the Treasury record. So to me, that should be sending up red flags to the legislature that come next year. What kind of revenues, right? We always wait to the April surprise when the taxes, they're going to be challenged, Phil. And that ties back into how much money can we spend on helping these energy issues? Is the federal government going to kick in money, right? President Trump is clawing back a lot of money. He clawed back some of the money for the Hudson Gateway Tunnel. So you got to start there. Do we have the money to do whatever we want to do? Then what is it that we want to do that really makes sense to business, makes sense to residents? And that's where you got to have that deliberation, and hopefully they come to an agreement. But I agree with you with the small modular reactors. We have the infrastructure, but if the state doesn't kick in any incentives, then it's very expensive to still build them. So.
Yeah, they're gonna have to do that. We'll see. So now, last night we saw in the debate, again, that was the last debate. We won't see another one. There were only two agreed upon. We saw it get a little personal, and we see all the TV ads, we see all the stuff. And I'm somebody who hates signs on the roads, but the signs were all over the place again. But on this personal side, what do you think? It matters. Last night, Mikey Sherrill brought up the discussion of, Jack's businesses and opioids. And, we've read a lot about, her Navy record. She didn't march at her graduation, and, whether she knew, didn't know, whether her husband was involved, all these different things. This is New Jersey. This is the Soprano state. Does negative ad campaigning really matter here? Do people, basically say, oh, that person's a bad person, I'm not going to vote for them, or I am going to vote for them? Where do you think that plays out in your numbers?
It's a great question. Here's how I would answer it.
And by the way, Mike can opine on this if he'd like to also.
I think
I'm going to let Tony answer that.
Okay.
I think people vote against somebody as much as they vote for somebody. And I want people to let that sink in. They vote against somebody as much as they vote for somebody. And it depends on the person. Some people, the personal stuff matters to most people. I don't think it's an issue, Phil, whether or not, she cheated and didn't turn people in, whether Jack with the publishing, like the attack last night. I think, people keep it simple, right? In terms of, am I better off? What are my bills? What's the future looking like? How can we work with the federal government? Is Congress ever going to get their act together? What is the future? And in my mind, it's all about, the energy issues that we're talking about. We're a logistics state. What about education, affordability? What is it that they want to do? And at the end of the day, you look at the two candidates, and again, not a lot of specifics, like in terms of like, and again, it's complicated, but to answer your question, do I think negative campaigning works? They wouldn't do it if it didn't, right? But I think it depends on who you talk to. But, in my mind, it's about those bigger issues that matter to the majority of the voters. But keep in mind now, remember what I said, less than half, take half of the voters off the table because they're not going to vote. Yeah. So it's really, I think it's going to be a partisan election, meaning that, who could mobilize the 2.5 million Democrats? Can she do that? Can Jack mobilize the 1.6 million Republicans? Oh, and by the way, what's their approach to peel off some Democrats, Republicans, or get the unaffiliated votes? But believe it or not, because I've talked to people, some people don't even know that there's an election coming up because there's no ballot questions. It's just the assembly. You probably have some local races out there. But, look, the governor's debate happened last night, thankfully before the Yankees game, right? It's Sunday. The first debate happened when the Giants were playing the Chiefs. How many people actually watched the debate? Like, not many. Are they going to stream it? Probably, but I think, and again, we could talk about turnout, but the path to victory is, like I said, 1.4, 1.5 million, whoever gets to that number will probably be the next governor. And how you get there is different for each candidate.
And Tony, the other thing is, if you look at historic trends, it's almost New Jersey goes up and down as far as governorships. And I think it was back in the early 60s, Phil, that we actually had, I think it was around Governor Minor, that the party that was in play, that was in the front office, wanted back then. Yeah, if you see the trends and patterns, a lot of pundits are saying, oh, it's the Republicans' turn to, have the front office. So we'll be interesting to see if they break that trend or not.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, right? I should have also mentioned that if Mikey wins, she'll be the only the second woman governor in our history out of 57, right? Christine Todd Whitman. So, a lot of things in play here, but politics is never easy. And that's why it's tough questions to answer, Phil, because I do think at the end of the day, it's personal, right? Everybody votes for a different reason, but I go back to people vote against somebody as much as they vote for somebody. And that's unfortunate in my mind, but.
And I agree with that. I would say in a lot of the presidential elections, I tend to vote against somebody than vote for somebody. Not as much good. I think I know a lot more when it comes to governor race. So with that said, who wins? Where are we? Who's our next governor?
I think it's going to be close.
Yeah, I think it's going to be whoever wins, Phil, is 2 or 3 points. That's how close it's going to be. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to go out on a limb and make a prediction, but I think it depends on, if the vote happened today, it'll be close, right? 3 weeks, Mike, what do you think? It's an eternity.
It's an eternity in politics, yeah. And we don't know if there's another late October bomb that's going to drop. I hear rumors on both sides, both camps. I've seen both candidates in multiple forums. So you're right. 3 weeks is an eternity in politics.
Yeah. Look, my hope, Phil, is that at the end of midnight at November 4th, we have a clear winner. Not like 4 years ago where we had to go into the next day and they added up some vote by mail ballots that really took it, because Jack had left. I think Jack won the same day vote last election, but obviously when the vote by mail tallies came in, that's what pushed Phil back over the top. And so my hope is that by the midnight, November 4th, we know who the winner is.
Yeah. And again, a lot can happen between now and November 4th. You still have to go. But I think also, so a lot of people, and again, social media plays a large part of where we are now. When someone came out yesterday and said when the Chitterelli camp is coming out and saying that they're 8 points down, how do you take that? That's got to mean that they're 8 points down, and to me, having spent some time studying polling and probably more than I should, and in a prior life interviewing, I can't think of his first name, Murphy from Monmouth Polling. His first name just escaped me. I don't put a lot into polling. I think a lot of it is very
Patrick
subjective.
Murray.
Patrick Murray. Yep. A lot of it's subjective, and you never know where it's going to end up based upon who they're talking to, how many people they've talked to, and what the value is. But if you had to, and I'll ask the question somewhat politically correct, for the environment, for the businesses in your organization, and I'll throw that out to both you and Mike, since he's sitting next to me here. Is there one of them that looks better than the other in what we need to go forward in the next 4 years?
Yeah, it's interesting because again, in preparing for today, I went to her website and again, not a lot of detail when it comes to the environmental stuff, right? So again, I keep it simple. I mean, typically the Republicans tend to, go along with the business concerns. The Democrats, it's about to me, the deal breaker will be like climate change and energy policy, right? What do we do there? So it's tough, but if I had to pick one where leaning environmental, he would probably be Jack, right? Because he's been out there saying we're going to pull out of Reggie, we're going to do a lot of the things, we're going to want to turn those natural gas plants back on. She wants to freeze them. She wants to do certain things, but her specifics haven't really been made publicly available. So it's kind of tough to see where she is on a lot of these issues. But the hope, Phil, is, and this is where I wanted to make a point, whoever becomes governor, it's important that we as a business group, Mike, everybody that's on this call, get plugged into the transition process. Because to me, during that 2 months of transition, where they pick cabinet members, they pick leaders, they pick people that they want, they're going to shape their policy. That all happens from November 5th to January 19th. That's fast, right?
You're only as good as the people you surround yourself
right.
with.
And so Mike and I have been around long enough to know if you're fortunate to get a seat at the table at that transition where you can kind of influence and advocate for some change and direction, that's important. You were part of our NJ Pro thing, Phil, where we kind of did a video out there that these are the big important things, whether it's workforce development on the site remediation. It's about giving the LSRPs their best judgment again. We got to stop the clawing back, but you got to keep the ask so simple. Like, okay, what's the solution then? How do we get it? How do we stop it from being clawed back? Same thing with air. Same thing with haz waste with the A901. These are going to be battles that we're going to have to fight, whether it's Governor Sherrill or Governor Chitterelli. It's important to see who they're going to surround themselves with because, it'll be important to get that done before January 19th.
Agreed. Closing remarks, you want to plug any upcoming events? I do appreciate your time you give for us. As Mike, if you want to plug something too, you can. And
hey, Phil, 30 seconds. One thing I wanted to throw out there that I think, in my opinion, will impact the region. This was like a wow moment earlier this week when it was announced that former Jersey City Mayor Steve Fulop has taken over the partnership for New York City, which is their equivalent, their chamber. That's a pretty powerful group. And I thought that was a really interesting move, especially the mayoral race there is going to be really interesting to watch. We're already hearing from businesses that Tony and I have that are members that also have, some footprint in New York saying, well, if a certain person is ends up mayor of New York, we might be jumping over to Jersey or Jersey City. So very, very interesting dynamics. I just wanted to throw that because politics is local, but regional as well. And that's something else to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it's interesting, Mike. You mentioned Jersey City and New York City because somebody said to me we could potentially have two former governors being mayors of those two cities, right?
Right. Yep.
So think about the dynamic there, right? If Mamdani wins and, does New Jersey pick up some companies? I was talking to companies that say, no, Tony, they're going to jump over New Jersey, go to Pennsylvania where the corporate business tax is 5%.
Lower,
Right.
yeah.
So, it's very important because we didn't even talk about the New York race. But Phil, to your point, as far as plugging things, I mean, we have our main event is going to be October 24th at the Westmount Country Club. We're going to have Kevin O'Toole, who's the chairman of the Port Authority, talking about what's coming up with the airport upgrades, the rail link to Newark Airport, World Cup preparations, right? The World Cup's coming next year. We have the 250th anniversary of America in the port. The importance of our ports to our economy, logistics, warehousing. So that's the 24th. And we have a young professionals event next Thursday at a company called Loopwell that we're putting together. And then, the League of Municipalities, you can't miss. We're going to do an event with the Manufacturers Extension Program in Tilcon. It'll be our first time CIANJ is actually doing something down there.
Okay.
So that's November 19th from 8 to 11, and anybody could show up. You don't have to.
The league's going to be big because think about it. We'll have an acting governor in play.
Yeah.
I actually talked to Mike Serra, runs the league, back in July. We had lunch just to touch base. And he told me that the Borgata, the Hard Rock, and the Ocean, the Old Rebel, were already sold out in early July. So the league's going to be pretty big this year. Yeah.
You don't want to miss it. November what, Mike, right? 18th, 19th, and 20th.
Yep. The week before Thanksgiving. Yeah. That Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are the big days down there.
Yeah, and I kept New York's mayoral race off because I was sticking with Senator Booker when he was questioned about who he supports in the mayor's race. He said, "I like them to stay in New York, and I don't want I'm not going to put myself into New York." So I kind of kept it out of it for this one.
Yeah.
I thought that was a good. I thought that was a good answer.
The interesting thing was that the New York partnership picked Steve Fulop to run, and I would even say that their chamber is probably even more powerful than the New York State equivalent, which is the New York Business Council. Right. They're a pretty big entity. The other thing I was going to say, Phil, for the state chamber, we're going to get on a rotational basis. We had a successful walk to Washington. We brought back after 5 years the train trip down to DC. We're going to get in a pattern. The way to remember it is AC/DC, AC/DC. So in next year, March 31st, we're going to have the business summit in Atlantic City again. And then the following year, we'll bring back the walk. So we're going to get on a rotational and get people to miss it and get back on the train. So
always a great event. Tony, as well as Mike, I appreciate your input today. I think it's the next 27 plus days will be very interesting. And for everybody, I tell, I think it's great you go out and vote for the president of the United States, but it matters here at home. I think more than anything, your local races, your legislative races, and your governor races, get out there and vote for the people who are going to put the most money in your pocket, not the most money in their pocket.
Exactly.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for the opportunity.
No, thank you very much. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Good to see you all.